The Persona series is a very special series to me. It came at a time when I was at a low point in my life and just felt lost and hopeless. At the tail end of 2020, I was bored one day and saw my brother finishing his run of Persona 5 Royal, quickly becoming captivated. I asked if I could borrow the game and give it a shot, and while I won't be diving into Persona 5 in this video, as that's a video I plan on tackling down the line, this got me in the door to try the series. Shortly after wrapping up Persona 5, my brother introduced me to the game he had just purchased from that same series, being Persona 3 FES on the PlayStation 2. Still riding the high of 5, I said screw it, dusted off my old PS2, and gave it a shot. I very quickly fell in love with the game in spite of all of its flaws, and while there's been many great reviews and breakdowns of this, that's not what I'm going to do today. Instead, I just want to highlight what makes this game special to me and why it very quickly and easily became my favorite game of all time. Oh, and of course, full spoilers ahead. Persona 3's cast of characters is one of my favorite casts in all of gaming. Each of them have flaws and personalities that make them feel real, and in turn, making them more relatable. I want to use this section of the video to really highlight what makes all of these characters special to me. Now, since all characters aren't created equal, there are some characters I'm going to have significantly less to say about than others, but with all that being said, I want to start this section off with the man, Junpei Iori. Junpei has got his fair share of flack over the years for his perviness or his arrogance, just people finding him downright annoying. However, I think all of that is surface level, and when you really dig deep into his character, you find someone that I think most of us can relate to on a personal level. In the early days of the game, he appears incredibly outgoing as he's the first person to greet Makoto. Yes, I will be referring to the protagonist as Makoto throughout this video, as that's my preferred name for him, and is generally just a fun character to be around. It isn't until you first start exploring Tartarus that some cracks start to show, as he shows a slight hint of resentment upon Makoto being named leader. This crescendos at the second full moon event when he rushes ahead of Yukari and Makoto on the monorail to show that he's worthy of being the leader. This, however, backfires as he is overwhelmed and saved by them, causing more frustration to him. After this situation, he gives you a bit of a cold shoulder until July, when he gives the player an apology. This was the first big step in Junpei's arc of the game, which is of course maturing into a better person. During the Yakushima trip, Junpei kinda takes a bit of a back seat, only really being present for Babe Hunt, which is admittedly hilarious, but in terms of character development, not a whole lot for this portion of the game. However, after the trip, during summer break, he occasionally meets up with a girl named Chidori. Chidori is someone who is very detached from life, being completely apathetic to it. That's where Junpei comes in. Throughout a lot of the game previous, Junpei has, as mentioned before, been a bit of a perv, but there's none of that with Chidori. He takes an interest in her art, and he shows concern when she has a cut on her hand. Hell, even after she betrays him and captures him after lying about being leader of SEES to impress her, he still goes to see her in the hospital and talk to her. His bond with Chidori is something that I think reshapes Junpei for a lot of the people who may not have liked him much in the early game. Of course though, Persona 3 throws a curveball in their whole relationship when Strega breaks Chidori out of the hospital, leading SEES to confront her. After the confrontation, Junpei is shot and seemingly killed by Takaya. Chidori, however, gives her life for his, and we get one of my favorite Persona awakenings with Trismegistus after Takaya makes fun of Chidori's sacrifice. Strega is defeated, but Junpei is completely devastated. Now, there is of course the option to speak to Junpei a few times before Chidori is broken out of the hospital. Upon doing that, and selecting the right dialogue options, Chidori can actually come back to life near the end of the game. Personally though, I'm not the biggest fan of this, as I think with the themes of the game, Junpei living on for himself and Chidori is a much stronger message to leave us with, but that's a side tangent for a different day. Back to the good stuff. The next big moment for Junpei for me, that shows his character growth, is in December, when the group is faced with the difficult question of whether or not to kill Ryoji and face Nyx, the Harbinger of Death. In this moment, Junpei lashes out at Yukari after making a joke and berates SEES for not taking this decision serious enough, before lashing out at Makoto. He blames him for everything that's going on, and this leads to one of my favorite Junpei scenes, because it shows a more human side to him. He's scared, even more so now than he was before. He's not only living for himself, but the sacrifice of the girl he loved. Even if he acts unreasonable here, at least a little bit, it's still a far cry from how he acted at the beginning of the game, and it's honestly powerful for me. Of course, he does eventually apologize for what he said, and you even get to have a one-on-one talk with him on the school roof, where you guys can reminisce on your time together. In Fest, that is. In Reload, it's replaced with Yukari also being there, which again, I'm not the biggest fan of, but I guess I can see why they did it. I think what makes this whole journey of his feel special, especially compared to some of the other bro characters in the series, is that he felt really human. I love Yosuke and Ryuji, but to me, a lot of the time they felt like glorified yes men who went along with the protagonist at every step. Junpei, however, doesn't shy away from butting heads with the protagonist, and even if it is unreasonable, he always apologizes or tries to make up for it when he knows he was in the wrong. At the end of the day, Junpei is just like the rest of us. When faced with life-ending stakes, he's scared. When faced with tough decisions, he lets his emotions get the best of him. But something I feel we can all relate with is the innate desire to be special. His initial hostilities towards Makoto were mainly centered around his insecurity at Makoto's power being greater than his. He thought that his value was centered around his strength, when that couldn't be further from the truth. His value is his heart. He's an incredibly kind and caring person who's always there for those who need him. By the end of the game, through Chidori's sacrifice, I believe that he believed that even if he wasn't anything special when it comes to getting good grades or being the best fighter, that didn't matter so long as he was special to those he cared about. Wow, that was a lot. Junpei is a character I've always loved and found to be someone that I can see a bit of myself in, both the best and worst aspects. Yukari is a character that was very hit or miss for a lot of people before Reload came out, and to be honest, I can see why. In Fest, she could come off needlessly cruel sometimes, as well as clashing heads with many of the other C's members, such as Mitsuru or Junpei. However, in my opinion, I really enjoyed that. It's what makes the cast of Persona 3 all feel real and distinct. Yukari is like your average teenager, someone who angers easily and gets emotional. Yeah, she doesn't always make the right decisions or say the right things, but none of us do. She also recognizes when she's in the wrong or gone too far. A few examples would be when she makes a joke about Junpei being scared of Nyx only for him to lash out, and she quickly apologizes. Or when Chidori sacrifices herself for Junpei, she shows care for him and consoles him, which is another aspect of Yukari I have always loved. She's a very caring and empathetic person, even towards those she doesn't particularly like or get along with. At the beginning of the game, despite being complete strangers, she comments on how wrong it feels that Ikutsuki and Mitsuru watch over Makoto as he sleeps. She also sits by his side during his coma after his awakening, and immediately shows care for him in his past, as she can empathize a lot with the loss of a parent. Then, later on when Mitsuru's father is tragically shot and killed, Yukari, despite clashing heads with Mitsuru a lot earlier in the game, begins to form a strong connection with Mitsuru to help her cope and get through the loss of her father. In my mind, Yukari not only understands what Mitsuru is going through, but after we learn in her social link that her and her mom were bullied after her father's death, and then became estranged from one another, I'm sure she felt alone and wanted to make sure Mitsuru never felt that way. Her resolution scene was also really powerful. After the quote-unquote reveal earlier in the game that her dad was involved in the creation of the Dark Hour, she was devastated and for a while felt she had lost her purpose to fight. However, after finding out that he actually tried to stop it and warn everyone, she strengthens her resolve to fight through her pain and stop the Dark Hour for her father. While it isn't my favorite resolution by any means, it really reinforces the themes of the game. There's a lot more I want to say about Yukari, but I'm going to save that for my section on the answer/episode I guess. Mitsuru is a character I never personally vibed with a lot. That being said, I still think she's a great character. At the start of the game, she's a little more on the mysterious side, I want to say. She seems like she knows more than she's letting on, and it causes some tension in the group, particularly between her and Yukari. It's then, however, revealed during Yakushima that her family and company were directly involved in the creation of the Dark Hour. Mitsuru is someone that holds a lot of guilt and weight on her shoulders because of this. Even though she wasn't involved directly, the sins of her father have passed down to her due to her persona powers. She manages to hide this pretty well for a vast majority of the game, being the calm and cool-headed parental figure for C's. However, that confident facade comes crashing down on her when, during Ikutsuki's betrayal, her father is shot and killed. This sends her spiraling as she believes now that her father is dead and all the shadows have been defeated, that she and Seize have no purpose anymore, no reason to continue fighting. However, the unexpected happens when Yukari, someone who clashed with Mitsuru this entire game leading up to this point, consoles her, and even if her words were harsh, they were exactly what Mitsuru needed to solidify her resolve. However, that's mostly it for Mitsuru's development in the main story. From here, she kinda slowly eases back into that parental figure role of the group, which once again, I have no issue with, but just leads me to not really vibe with her as much as the two aforementioned characters. I will say though, I do really like her social link. I think it's really cute seeing her try to relax and enjoy the things she never got to as a child, like a cheeseburger, and her sticking up to her fiance and confessing her feelings for Makoto is also a cute moment, but not much else I have to add to her character besides that. Fuka is another character I don't really vibe with much, though that's a much more common sentiment than what I just said about Mitsuru. Fuka, especially in FES, has received a lot of flack over the years, some justified, and some not so much. It's true that she gets a lot less to work with in the main story itself, but that doesn't mean she doesn't play an important role in Seize. For starters, I think she acts as the backbone for the team, always trying to stay positive and keep everyone together and level-headed. I believe this all stems from the fact that up really until the point where she met Seize, she never had any friends and didn't really have a good relationship with her parents at all. I think this makes it so when she forms these real bonds with the members of Seize, she pushes her own feelings aside to try and keep them together, as she doesn't want the people she cares about to drift away or fight to leave her alone again. Fuka is also shown to be a very forgiving and caring person, as despite her best friend Natsuki locking her in the school at night, causing her to get lost in Tartarus and nearly killed, she still ends up forgiving her. This also ends up being the crux of what little development she gets in the story, where eventually Natsuki informs Fuka that she'll be moving away, and the two of them share a heartfelt talk on the school roof. This talk is very sweet and does lead to Fuka awakening to her evolved persona, but it's definitely my least favorite of all the awakenings. Again, Fuka as a character is so fixated on her relationships with other characters that we never really get a deeper insight into her character. Her social link does kind of dive into her hobbies and insecurities, which did warm me to her a bit more, but otherwise she's probably my least favorite member of Seize. I wanted to talk about Shinji next, as it'll make talking about the next two characters a lot easier and make it flow better. Shinji is a character that I really liked in FES but didn't love. At the beginning of the game, he shows up a few times to either bail Makoto, Yukari, and Junpei out of trouble, or to have conversations with Akihiko. He initially refuses to join Seize again for a reason we aren't aware of quite yet. However, eventually it's revealed why exactly Shinji doesn't want to join Seize. On October 4th, Shinji and Ken have a confrontation where it's revealed that years ago, while Seize was still just Shinji, Akihiko, and Mitsuru, Shinji's persona went haywire and ended up accidentally killing Ken's mom. This has led Shinji down a pit of despair and self-loathing. He even resorts to taking pills to suppress his persona so as to never hurt anyone again, even though he knew those pills would slowly kill him. However, during this meeting, Takaya gets involved and reveals to Ken that Shinji is dying anyway, which utterly destroys Ken. Takaya then aims to put Ken out of his misery by shooting him, but at the last second, Shinji intervenes and is shot in the chest, quickly collapsing to the ground. Ken looks on in shock as the rest of Seize arrive to see their friends slowly fading. He leaves a final word of advice to Ken, to live for himself now and turn his anger into strength, before asking Aki to take care of Ken. Shinji, despite not being around for a long time, is a massively important character and heavily reinforces the themes of the game. I will dive more into those in a later section of the video, but his death is what really pushes Ken and Akihiko forward. However, I did mention earlier that I didn't love Shinji. Well, that was until his character was explored in a lot of other mediums. In Persona 3 Portable FemC route, we get an entire social link delving deep into his character with a very sweet romance to boot. And in the movies, we also get a look deeper into his character. He has a rough and tough exterior, but on the inside he's just a big softie. He makes sure everyone is eating healthy, as he loves to cook, and always brings Koromaru on walks to bond with the dog. In Persona 3 Reload though, they take it a step further and implement most of the movie and portable aspects of his character, with a tragic storyline between him and Mitsuru about attending school once again to boot. See, Shinji has constantly been skipping school as he has no stock in his future. He knew the pills he was taking were killing him, and I think the amount of guilt on his conscience, he didn't even believe he deserved to live a happy and fulfilling life. By doing his linked episodes, however, it is possible to convince him to re-enroll in school, and though he doesn't survive to go back to school, you can enter his room and find the completed form, which is just heartbreaking. Shinji over the years has only improved as a character and become one of my favorite SEES members due to the additions from various other adaptations. But even just taking Fest into account, he's still an incredibly solid and important character that left an impression on so many players. Ken is a character who is frequently at the bottom of most people's lists for SEES members, and I was there for a long time as well. It wasn't until my recent playthroughs and dive back into the game that I really started to appreciate Ken and his role in the story a lot more. When you first meet Ken, he seems to be a normal kid who is respectful. He is put in the Iwatodai dorm because of his potential to wield a persona. He is the catalyst for Shinji rejoining SEES, as well as now that Ken is there, Shinji wants to watch over him. When Shinji joins the party though, Ken starts to become more quiet and cryptic with what he says. Obviously we touched on it in Shinji's section of the video, but Ken's parents were killed by Shinji at his very young age. Since then, he had been plotting his revenge against whoever killed his mother. On October 4th, when he confronts Shinji, Shinji tells Ken to kill him, but prefaces that if he does, he will live to regret it for the rest of his life. This gets recontextualized, however, when Takaya all but confirms that Ken had planned on taking his own life after killing Shinji, which utterly shocks and horrifies him. After Shinji's death, Ken feels as he has lost all purpose in his life, as he had been living with the sole goal to avenge his mother. But with that done and over with, what could he possibly have to live for now? Ken breaks down to Akihiko, prompting Akihiko to tell him that he didn't find Ken to bring him back to the dorm. He tells Ken that he can either stay in the alley and sulk or come back to SEES and use that life of his mother and Shinji left him to continue fighting. Ken then resolves himself to keep up the fight, to not let his life go to waste. This causes his ultimate persona to awaken, and honestly, it's a very good awakening scene in my opinion. Fortunately, Ken as a character doesn't get too much to work with after this point in the game, but that small window of development was done incredibly well. Akihiko, the man, the myth, and the legend. I've been waiting for this! Opportunity to talk about him, that is. Akihiko is a character that is equal parts tragic as he is inspiring. When you first meet him, he seems to be a meathead who loves to just fight and work out. However, you soon realize there's a lot more to him than that. Akihiko is someone who, just like Ken and Shinjiro, is clinging to the past. His sister died when they were both young, and since then he has become obsessed with power, trying to constantly push forward and become stronger so as to not lose anyone again. This obsession and fear causes him to lose sight of the present, and on that fateful October 4th day, his lifelong friend is killed. At his funeral the next day, Akihiko reflects upon himself and his lust for powers, and breaks down in front of Shinji's memorial. This is really the first time we've seen a crack in his character, as before this he was one of the most level-headed characters on the team, who never really lost himself. In this moment he resolves himself to be better, and awakens to his ultimate persona, in one of, if not the absolute best awakenings in this entire game. It hurts me that so many spin-offs boil his character down to the one-dimensional meathead a lot of people thought he could have been in the original, because he's so much more than that. He's a character who has helped inspire me, and do some self-reflection. Let go of the past and guilt and move on with your life to better yourself. No matter what comes his way, he's always ready to take it head on, and be there for his friends, and that just sat with me. I don't have much else to say about his character. Like I said before, this isn't a full analysis or breakdown, just what I personally love about them. But in my opinion, Akihiko is a character that almost anyone can vibe with or relate to. I know Koromaru is just the dog, and this section will be incredibly brief, but his story does actually relate very well to the core themes of the game. Koromaru is the only team member to survive Persona 3 without an ultimate persona. The reason for that is because his development and resolve happens before you meet him in the main story. Koromaru's master passed away at an undisclosed period of time before the main story. Koromaru from then on resolved to protect the shrine that him and his master were always at, believing it to be a sacred place. This results in him getting wounded by a shadow and taken in by SEES, who give him a new loving home. And just like that, Koromaru is a part of the team, and his arc is over. It's a very sweet and tragic arc based on a real story where a dog named Hachiko waited for his master's return despite him being dead for 9 years. This in itself is tragic, and lends an extra bit of depth to Koro's character than what is initially presented in the game. Aigis is my favorite Persona character throughout all the games. I've played all the mainline ones at this point, and while characters like Akechi, Tatsuya, and Akihiko are all up there for me, Aigis takes the cake. I've always been a sucker for the robot finding human emotions trope, but Aigis is done exceptionally well to me. Throughout the game, you can notice so many subtle changes in her vocabulary and demeanor, while her voice also becomes less robotic and more emotional, but I'll save that for a bit, as she's first introduced to us on the Yakushima trip during the Babe Hunt event, where she shows interest in Makoto for an undisclosed reason. After the trip, she officially joins SEES and is constantly going on about how she needs to protect the main character and be near him. Once again, it's completely unknown why she's acting like this. After you eventually defeat all of the full moon bosses, a character named Ryoji transfers to the school and Aigis is immediately hostile towards him. Once again, we have no idea why. This all comes to a head on December 2nd when she confronts Ryoji on the Moonlight Bridge and everything is revealed. 10 years before the main story, Aigis and Ryoji, who at the time was the incarnation of death, got into a heated battle, during which Makoto's parents were killed. Aigis, knowing she's no match for death, seals him inside of Makoto's body, explaining why she felt a connection to him at first and why she immediately was hostile towards Ryoji. Aigis tries to attack him, but pushes herself too far and ends up shutting down for the entire month of December. It is then revealed to the player that Ryoji is the appriser of death, and no matter what, the world is going to end. So he poses the group a dilemma. They can either kill him and live their last remaining days in blissful ignorance, or let him live and face death head-on in impossible battle. Everyone resolves to fight, even if it means certain death. After Aigis' return, she apologizes to everyone for worrying them, but says that even if something happened to her, she could just be fixed and rebuilt, and that she's not like them. She says she can't even shed a tear for them. And in a moment of weakness, she begs them to kill Ryoji and live their last month in blissful ignorance, as she doesn't want her friends to experience any more pain, or in her own words, waste their lives. When they tell her why they want to fight, she claims to not understand because she doesn't have a life. She falls to her knees and begs them to tell her her purpose, as in her mind she's too weak to fulfill her initial one. Junpei, however, steps forward and tells her they don't have the answer, that she must find it deep within herself. And this is a beautiful scene where all of SEES help Aigis dig deep into herself and find her purpose. This is incredibly potent, as everyone else struggled with this earlier on in the game, and it's because of everything they've went through that helped them help Aigis. Again, this is absolutely a top 3 awakening scene to me, and I love every second of it. As someone who has questioned their purpose in life so many times and really struggled to find an answer, this scene just always hits. Aigis' social link is a brilliant extension of this moment and is again one of my favorite social links in the entire series, tackling the themes of life and its importance. It always makes me tear up watching her slowly start to understand the beauties of life more and more. Her story ends in a tragedy though, as after the defeat of Nyx, she's the only person to remember exactly what happened, and the promise everyone made to meet on the rooftop of school on graduation day. That is except for one other person, that being Makoto himself, who weakly stumbles onto the roof. He then rests his head on Aigis' lap as she talks about her renewed purpose in life, to protect him and always be by his side. This without fail has always made me absolutely bawl my eyes out every single time I finish this story. Whether it's the movies, fests, or reload, it never fails to hit me where it hurts. Once again, as someone who has always struggled to find their passion and their reason, as someone who has sunk to rock bottom and even questioned if life was worth living, Aigis' story helped me immensely figure out that any goal, no matter how big or small, is worth pursuing and living for. And that is the absolute beautiful tragedy in her character for me. As a silent protagonist, you may think it's silly that I even have a section for Makoto, but I don't think so. Makoto has a lot of implied character in the game and a full-fledged character in the movies I'd like to dive into just a little bit. Makoto experienced so much trauma at a young age, with his parents being killed in an unfortunate accident. This causes him to be pretty apathetic to life. It's a running meme throughout the community that Makoto is the I don't care protagonist, but I mean, can you blame him? He has been growing up all alone for years. No parents, no siblings, no friends, and just going through the motions. He has no passions in life, no wants, and no bonds to hold on to. That is until he transfers to Iwatodai dorm and Gekugan High. Here he forms bonds with the SEES members and various people throughout the school, which slowly loosens him up over time. Some of my favorite social links are Mutatsu, Maiku, and Akinari, whose social link is just so damn good, and it's been said a million times, but watching this kid who's dying slowly bond with the player and finally ending his book is just so sweet, made all the better by the bookmaking cameo in Persona 4. But back to Makoto. He slowly smiles more and becomes more friendly the more bonds he makes. He starts to see SEES as his family and people that he'd do anything to protect. He eventually does lose his life, sealing away Nyx and saving all of his friends, but not before honoring his promise to everybody, as his body, despite being weak, forcing himself, to make it to the roof on graduation day, where he slowly dies. This is one of the most beautiful endings I've ever seen for a game. His journey is incredibly well done, even if he is silent throughout most of the game, and his ultimate sacrifice is the pinnacle of what this game is going for. To me, the theme of this story is finding purpose in life through loss. Think about it. Each and every single one of the Seize cast found their meaning through losing someone important to them. Junpei got the resolve to push ahead and better himself through the sacrifice of Chidori. Yukari found a resolve after seeing the truth behind her father's death, that he wasn't actually a bad person and tried to stop the Dark Hour. Mitsuru found her resolve after a pep talk from Yukari after her father's death. Fuka found her resolve after Natsuki left, but promised that they'd always keep in touch no matter what. Shinji found his purpose in the face of death, passing his final words and resolve to Ken and Aki. Ken found his resolve when he came to terms with Shinji and his mother's deaths, and aimed to move forward and keep fighting for them. Akihiko found his resolve after realizing that his pursuit for power and being stuck in the past was causing him to lose sight of the present and eventually his best friend. Makoto finds his resolve in the face of death after forging bonds with all of his friends, and Aigis, well, she does find her resolve when everyone tells her how far she's come and why she wants to fight, but by the end of the game, her resolve moved towards a goal that unfortunately is unattainable due to the unfortunate death of Makoto. But this theme I think everyone can relate to in some form or fashion. Most of us have lost something or someone special in the past that causes us to waver, question life and why it can be cruel sometimes. However, there's always something to keep you going no matter how hopeless things may seem. No matter how tough life can become, there is always an answer to that looming question of why we live. Next, I want to discuss the epilogue to Persona 3, The Answer. This has always been a very polarizing topic of discussion, but I think that this DLC wraps everything up in a nice, neat little bow. This DLC puts us in Aigis' shoes after the death of Makoto. Seize has grown apart and is fractured, and Aigis is haunted by dreams of Makoto. She ends up slowly going back to her more robotic self as she feels her purpose is completely lost. This comes to a head when, after exploring the new Abyss of Time, a secret dungeon that opened under the dorm, they defeat a shadow version of Makoto and get a key. This key either allows them to go back in time to try and save Makoto, or unlock the front door and continue on with their lives. Akihiko and Ken are persistent in opening the front door. After what they went through with Shinji, they learn that moving forward is important and not being chained to the past. Junpei is unsure, as he says he frequently wonders if he would go back to save Chidori and doesn't have a proper answer. Meanwhile, Yukari is adamant on going back. She lets her emotions get the best of her and fights everyone else on the topic, showing particular disgust to Aigis, who remains unsure of what to do, despite being the closest to Makoto and inheriting his persona powers. Now, a lot of people hated on Yukari over this back when it first released, and I can't for the life of me understand why. It's been highlighted in several other videos, but Yukari at the end of the day is just a teenage girl. She lost someone she deeply cared about and has a chance to bring him back. She's not thinking logically here, she's thinking with emotion, and that's realistic. If we ever got the chance to go back and save a loved one, do you think your rational brain would kick in? Absolutely not. I hate that they toned her down a lot in Reload, because I think it takes away from a lot of the conflict in this epilogue. Side tangent over, Aigis ends up teaming up with her sister Metis, who throughout this expansion has been obsessed with protecting Aigis over all else, to take on the other members of Seize. These fights are as difficult as they are sad. We spend 70 hours watching these characters bond in the main game, only for them to break down into a conflict that's come to fighting each other. After you defeat all members of Seize, all the keys combine into one, and now the decision is all Aigis's. Before she makes one though, they unlock the protagonist's door to reveal the real cause behind his death, and find that he sealed Nyx to prevent her from destroying the entire world. They then see a dark shadow named Erebus try and break the seal to unleash Nyx upon the world. Seize defeats Erebus, but realize that if they are able to get the world to stop wishing for death, they can save their friend. I'm mixed on this, as I don't like the idea that Makoto can come back after how great and thematic his sacrifice was, but nonetheless, this closure helps Aigis get the resolve she needs to open the front door. Here she decides that instead of going back to the lab, she is going to return to school with the rest of her friends, and as they all take off, leaving the dorm behind, the song Brand New Day starts to play, and the tears flood again. This may not be for everyone, but to me it was an excellent send-off and closing chapter for Seize, with a complimentary message to the main game. Now I just want to talk a bit about the music. As such with the story and characters, I am no genius when it comes to music theory or anything of the sort. I just put stuff on and vibe if it makes my ears happy. That being said, this game makes my ears very happy. The original Mass Destruction keeps me grooving during fights. Moon Reaching Stars has me jamming when I'm out and about in the city. Iwa Todai Dorm gets frequently earwormed right into my brain. Master of Tartarus gets me pumped to get my ass whooped by a Tartarus Guardian, and don't even get me started on Battle for Everyone's Souls. Not just my favorite Persona boss battle theme, but quite possibly one of my favorite boss battle themes in all of gaming. Memories of You in the end credits is a song that will forever emotionally destroy me. Burn My Dread is a fantastic intro song, and makes Burn My Dread Final Battle even more special when it finally hits at the end of the game. So many good tracks that I could bring up, and that's not even counting Persona 3 Portable or Reload, with stuff like Wiping All Out, Time, It's Going Down Now, Soul Phrase, Full Moon Full Life. Persona is no stranger to amazing music, but Persona 3 especially has some of my favorite tracks in all of gaming. For the final part of this video, I just wanted to touch a small bit on the gameplay. I'll start with Reload as it's the version I have the least to say on. It's what you'd come to expect from a modern Atlus game with small changes like theurgies that really trivialize a lot of the challenge that was in the original Persona 3. I don't really mind this per se, as I've always been a story first kind of person, but I can see how it had turned some fans from the original FES away. Speaking of, FES is probably the single most divisive game in the entire series when it comes to gameplay. I personally stand on not really minding it too much. Not being able to control your party members is definitely a big hurdle for a lot of people. Hell, it was for me, coming off the heels of Persona 5 Royal, but I think the tactics system goes very underappreciated. It adds a different spice and flair to fights, where you really need to strategize and synchronize with your teammates more by selecting the various commands at your disposal. Does it always work? No, not at all. I'm looking at you, Mitsuru, and your Marin Karen spam. But when it does, it is so satisfying. During the final fight with Nyx on my first playthrough, I brought Yukari, Aigis, and Akihiko, with Yukari on healing, and Aigis and Akihiko on attacking duty, with Akihiko occasionally buffing, and it was honestly super fun and intense. Definitely one of the most satisfying feelings I've ever felt in Persona and gaming. But that's just my 2 cents, and in no way am I invalidating anyone who may not like the tactics system, because I can totally see how it had turned some people away. I know there's a lot of things I could have discussed, like I didn't deep dive into the story, and maybe I could have been more detailed about the characters, but this video isn't about any of that. This video is just me discussing what I took away from Persona 3 and why it's special to me. It's my favorite video game of all time and has characters and themes that I really relate to on a personal level. I hope you enjoyed watching this video about a man ranting for far too long about a game that's been constantly on his mind since he first played it years ago. I do plan on doing more Persona and other gaming content in the future, so if you're at all interested in that, any bit of support helps. Thank you so much for watching.